Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at Loveworld USA News. I'm Joel Richard. First, a quick look at the top stories this evening. Suspect in Kirk killing charged with aggravated murder. Prosecutors cite DNA match in texts. And President Trump heads to UK for historic second state visit. $15 billion defamation suit filed against the New York Times by President Donald Trump. The Georgia Supreme Court keeps Fani Willis disqualified from Trump election case. And the Minnesota special election draws attention after killing of lawmaker. And now, to the news. Prosecutors charged 22-year-old Tyler Robinson with aggravated murder in the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, a count that could carry the death penalty if he's convicted. Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray said Robinson's DNA was found on the trigger of the rifle used in the attack, and also cited a text message confession and a note in which Robinson wrote he had the chance to kill one of the nation's leading conservative voices. The filing says Robinson told his partner he spent more than a week planning the shooting. Kirk was gunned down on September 10th while speaking with students at Utah Valley University. Prosecutors allege Robinson fired a bolt-action rifle from a nearby rooftop, striking Kirk in the neck. Robinson was scheduled to appear via video for a court hearing today afternoon. As of the filing, no attorney was listed for him in Utah's online docket, and his family declined to comment. Now, authorities have not identified a definitive motive. Gray said messages reviewed by investigators included Robinson's line about Kirk. "I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out." He called the killing an American tragedy. Let's take a look.
Today, after reviewing the evidence that law enforcement has collected thus far, I am filing a criminal information charging Tyler James Robinson, age 22, with the following crimes. Count 1, aggravated murder, a capital offense, for intentionally or knowingly causing the death of Charlie Kirk under circumstances that created a great risk of death to others. Count 2, felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, a first-degree felony. The state is further alleging aggravating factors on counts 1 and 2 because the defendant is believed to have targeted Charlie Kirk based on Charlie Kirk's political expression and did so knowing that children were present and would witness the homicide.
President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump are on the way to the United Kingdom for a historic second state visit. Now, the trip marks the first time in modern history that a U.S. president has been invited for two state visits by the British monarchy. King Charles III will host the ceremonies at Windsor Castle, joined by the Prince and Princess of Wales. The visit will feature a traditional event, including a guard of honor, gun salute, and a carriage procession at Windsor. A joint military flyover by the U.S. F-35s and Britain's Red Arrows will also take place. Now, notably, Prince Andrew will not participate due to his ties to Jeffrey Epstein, which have drawn scrutiny in the UK. Now, beyond the ceremonial elements, President Trump will hold a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Keir Starmer at Chequers. Talks are expected to focus on global security challenges, including Russia's war in Ukraine, NATO's obligations following recent drone incursions into Polish airspace, and the conflict in Gaza. Trade and technology partnerships are also on the agenda. Now, the White House said new agreements will strengthen cooperation in defense technology, financial services, and civil nuclear power development. Officials indicated the upcoming deals could amount to tens of billions in joint investments. Key members of President Donald Trump's cabinet, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, are accompanying him on the trip. Watch this.
Trump and his wife will be welcomed for a 3-day visit from Tuesday till Thursday. He was previously hosted by the late Queen on a state visit during his first term in office in 2019, in what Prime Minister Keir Starmer described as a tremendous success.
His Majesty the King wants to make this even better than that, so this is truly historic.
So, what is a state visit? What can we expect Trump to be doing while he's here? And who might be attending?
President Donald Trump has filed a $15 billion defamation lawsuit against the New York Times in federal court in Florida, targeting 4 journalists over a book and 3 articles published in the run-up to last year's election. Now, in announcing the suit, President Trump accused the Times of acting as a partisan outlet and said its coverage falsely portrayed his business history and rise to fame, including claims that TV producer Mark Burnett made him a celebrity. The Times called the case meritless and an effort to intimidate independent reporting, vowing to continue its coverage. The complaint singles out work by reporters Russ Buettner and Suzanne Craig, who wrote both an article and the book Lucky Loser, how Donald Trump squandered his father's fortune and created the illusion of success, as well as separate pieces by Peter Baker and Michael F. Smith, including an interview with former Chief of Staff John Kelly. Now, Penguin Random House said it stands by the book and its authors. The filing comes after President Donald Trump brought and news organizations settled lawsuits against ABC News and CBS's 60 Minutes, and after he sued the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch over reporting on his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, none of these cases reached trial. The Times said it will defend its First Amendment rights without fear or favor. Watch this.
Issued via Truth Social, saying this, quote, "Today I have the great honor of bringing a $15 billion defamation and libel lawsuit against the New York Times, one of the worst and most degenerate newspapers in the history of our country, becoming a virtual mouthpiece for the radical left Democrat Party. I view it as the single largest illegal campaign contribution ever. Their endorsement of Kamala Harris was actually put dead center on the front page of the New York Times, something heretofore unheard of. The Times has engaged in a decades-long method of lying about your favorite president, and then in parentheses, me, my family, business, the America First movement, MAGA, and our nation as a whole." And then it goes on to say, a quote, "I am proud to hold this once respected rag responsible as we are doing with the fake news networks, such as our successful litigation against George Slappadopoulos, what he calls him, slash ABC slash Disney, and 60 Minutes slash CBS slash Paramount, who knew that they were falsely smearing me through a highly sophisticated system of document and visual alteration, which was in effect a malicious form of defamation, and thus settled for records amounts. They practice this long-term intent and pattern of abuse, which is both unacceptable and illegal. The New York Times has been allowed to freely lie, smear, and defame me for far too long, and that stops now. The suit is being brought in the great state of Florida. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again."
In more news on the judiciary, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis will remain barred from prosecuting the Georgia election interference case against President Donald Trump after the state Supreme Court declined today to hear her appeal. The ruling leaves intact the lower court's decision that Willis and her office must be removed due to misconduct concerns. Now, the case will now be handed to the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, which will assign an independent prosecutor to determine how to proceed. Willis said she disagrees with the decision, but confirmed she will begin transferring the case, expressing hope that the new prosecutor will continue it. President Donald Trump's attorney, Steve Sado, welcomed the ruling, saying the court correctly denied review and that it should end what he described as politically driven prosecutions against the President of the United States. Trump and 18 others were indicted in August 2023 under racketeering charges tied to alleged efforts to challenge the state's 2020 election results. Several co-defendants, including attorneys Kenneth Chesebro, Sidney Powell, and Jenna Ellis, previously took plea deals in exchange for testimony. President Donald Trump has consistently argued the indictment was a partisan attempt to interfere in politics rather than a legitimate legal case. Let's take a look.
Lower Court of Appeals ruling to disqualify from this case will remain in place, meaning her office can no longer move forward with prosecuting this case. Now, this all comes from the August 2023 indictment indicting President Trump and 18 other defendants who were accused of attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. Now, DA Fonnie Willis was first removed from this case in December, and that is after President Trump and other defendants, they wanted her removed from this case after a judge said her romantic relationship with the former special prosecutor Nathan Wade created an appearance of impropriety. Defense attorneys for Trump and other defendants pushed for her removal after that relationship came to light.
The news will be back after this break.
Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project is all about making sure the voice of our man of God, Pastor Chris Oyakhilome, arrives exactly when someone needs it the most. It's a global campaign to saturate the world with the gospel of our Lord Jesus like never before.
The gospel is going to go into places that it never was before, into disciplines and areas that it never was before, and establish a higher way of life.
Make a global impact today with your sponsorship of Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project. For every home you sponsor, you send the gospel where it's never gone. You become the reason someone receives life, a second chance, and finds Jesus. Through the dynamic Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project, we've been able to expand our global mission, touching more souls, more regions, and producing a wave of powerful testimonies from people whose lives have been forever changed. Your financial support as a Loveworld USA partner is not just generous, it's supernatural power for global impact. Let's keep sending the gospel into every home through the Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project. Sign up today and sponsor any of the following categories.
It's time for you to give the right sacrifice, the right seed, because it's time for you to get the right harvest.
You can sponsor Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project by calling or going on our website now. Sign up to be Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project partner today. God bless you.
This just in today, Minnesota voters are casting ballots in a special election to replace former House Speaker Melissa Hortman, who was killed alongside her husband in June in what authorities described as a politically motivated attack. The race has gained national attention as it comes just weeks after the assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, further highlighting growing concerns over political violence. Now, the election will determine control of the Minnesota House, where Republicans currently hold a one-seat advantage. Democrat XP Lee, a former Brooklyn Park City Council member, faces Republican candidate Ruth Bittner, a real estate agent. Now, if Democrats reclaim the seat, the chamber will be split 67 to 67, creating a deadlock. Lee has campaigned on carrying forward Hortman's legacy, while also focusing on healthcare and education. Bittner has emphasized public safety, government efficiency, and her outsider status, framing herself as a fresh voice for the district. Now, both candidates have acknowledged heightened voter concerns following multiple high-profile shootings in the state. Prosecutors say the accused gunman, Vance Bolter, posed as a police officer and used a mask to carry out the killings. Authorities later found a list of about 45 officials and activists in his possession, suggesting broader political motives. Now, the outcome of today's election will decide which party holds power in the closely divided legislature. Watch this.
Special election today to fill the seat of a Minnesota lawmaker who was killed in what authorities call a politically motivated murder. Representative Melissa Hortman had served as the Democratic House Speaker in that state. She and her husband were shot and killed in their home in June. Another lawmaker and his wife were also shot that same day, but survived.
In other news, the Federal Reserve is expected to lower interest rates for the first time this year, with officials on the Federal Open Market Committee preparing to announce a 25 basis point cut on Wednesday. Now, the move would bring the federal funds rate down to a target range of 4% to 4.25%, marking the first cut since December 2024. Markets have already priced in the decision, with futures data showing a 96% probability of a quarter-point cut and a slim chance of a larger reduction. Now, policymakers are balancing two competing pressures: inflation that remains above the Fed's 2% target and a weakening labor market. The most recent jobs reports show just 22,000 jobs created in August, with revisions revealing July at 79,000 and June showing a net loss of 13,000. Now, meanwhile, inflation has moved higher in recent months. The Fed's preferred metric, the PCE index, rose to 2.6% in July, while core PCE climbed to 2.9%. Now, the Consumer Price Index also registered a 2.9% annual increase, with core CPI up 3.1%. Fed Chair Jerome Powell has said that when both employment and inflation diverge from the central bank's target, policymakers focus on the side under greater stress. Weak job creation has weighed heavily on the decision to cut rates, though tariffs imposed under President Donald Trump have added upward pressure on prices. Powell acknowledged earlier this summer that without tariffs driving inflation forecasts higher, the Fed might have already cut rates further. The Trump administration has pressed for lower rates as a way to bolster growth and reduce borrowing costs on the national debt. Some FOMC members, including Governors Michelle Bowman and Christopher Waller, had already called for cuts at the July meeting, marking the first such pro-cut dissent since 1993. The Fed's decision this week will signal how it intends to balance inflation concerns with slowing job growth in the month ahead. Let's take a look.
Right now, inflation is above the Fed's ideal goal of 2%, and normally the Fed would then keep interest rates up. But it's also looking at the slowing jobs market, which suggests consumer spending and hiring are cooling. The Fed would want to cut interest rates in this case. Experts believe the Fed is leaning towards a rate cut, which generally makes borrowing money cheaper. Interest rates on credit cards would go down, car loans less expensive, and easier to get an affordable mortgage rate. In short, a cut could help re-stimulate the economy, but could also reignite inflation. At a time when millions are already feeling the squeeze, a recent report actually shows financial stress has more than doubled since 2021.
Debt right now, what that tells us is it's dominating decisions each day, and it's leading to sometimes very painful sacrifices that consumers are having to make just to get by.
This graph from our Get the Facts data team shows the direct ripple effect as the Fed's rate, as you can see with the orange line, climbed beginning in spring of 2022. So did the rates for mortgages, cars, and personal loans, as well as credit cards.
Pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly will invest $5 billion to expand a manufacturing complex in Goochland County, Virginia, boosting U.S. production of active pharmaceutical ingredients for cancer, autoimmune, and other advanced therapies. The project at West Creek Business Park is expected to create about 650 high-wage jobs and 1,800 construction jobs. It marks a major expansion from Lilly's earlier $2.1 billion plan that would have added 468 jobs. Eli Lilly CEO David Riss said the move underscores Lilly's commitment to U.S. innovation and a more secure, resilient supply chain that delivers for patients today and supports the breakthrough medicines of tomorrow. The company said the Virginia sites will help meet rising demand across its pipeline as domestic capacity becomes more strategically important. The announcement comes as the Trump administration threatens sweeping tariffs on imported pharmaceuticals, potentially up to 250%, to push drug making onshore. Drug makers have responded with a new U.S. investment. Earlier this year, Eli Lilly outlined at least $27 billion for 4 domestic facilities to hedge policy risk and reduce reliance on overseas suppliers. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin hailed the decision as a win for the state's life sciences ecosystem and U.S. supply chain security. State and local officials expect the project to catalyze high-skilled hiring in process engineering, quality, and advanced manufacturing, with additional economic benefits from supplier networks that typically grow around large-scale pharma plants. With that in mind, the news continues after this break. Stay with us.
It's easy to set up, quick to start, and packed with value. Smarter streaming starts here with the Alpha TV Stick. Just plug and stream anytime, anywhere. Discover a curated lineup of content designed to inspire, live broadcasts and global events, inspirational films and series, children's programming, healing and teaching sessions, all on demand. With millions of downloads worldwide, the Alpha TV app is transforming lives across the globe. And now, we're on a mission to reach 1 billion downloads of the Alpha TV app, and you can be part of it. Join the global wave with 1 billion Alpha TV app downloads worldwide. Bring the higher life into every home. Order your Alpha TV stick today and experience smarter streaming. Alpha, the higher life is here.
Welcome back. This just in today, the Trump administration formally designated Colombia as having demonstrably failed to meet its counter-narcotics obligations, adding it to a list that includes Afghanistan, Bolivia, Myanmar, and Venezuela. The annual certification, which can trigger aid cuts, stopped short of suspending U.S. assistance, but marks Colombia's first decertification since 1997 and further strains relations with President Gustavo Petro's government. Washington argued that coca cultivation and cocaine production have reached record highs under Petro and said his peace talks with armed groups, many financed by drug trafficking, have hindered enforcement. While praising the skill and courage of Colombian security forces, the presidential determination blamed political leadership and urged more aggressive action on eradication and trafficking, leaving the door open to recertification if progress is shown. Bogota rejected the assessment. Petro said major increases occurred under his predecessor and cited record cocaine seizures since he took office. A United Nations survey showed coca cultivation rose 10% in 2023, with updated figures due next month. Now, in response to the designation, Interior Minister Armando Benedetti said Colombia would halt purchases of U.S. weapons, and Petro reiterated that demand reduction in the U.S. and Europe is essential to curb cultivation. The move comes as the White House elevates the fight against narco-terrorists. Just on Monday, President Donald Trump announced the U.S. military destroyed an alleged Venezuelan drug vessel in international waters, saying 3 people were killed. Beyond the immediate diplomatic chill, Colombia's decertification raises questions about security cooperation, future aid conditions, and how the both governments might recalibrate eradication, interdiction, rural development, and demand-side strategies to show measurable results. With more news on the international front, China's Coast Guard accused a Philippine vessel of deliberately ramming one of its ships near Scarborough Shoal today, while the Philippines said Chinese forces blasted a fisheries boat with powerful water cannons, causing significant damage and injuring a crew member. Now, Beijing said more than 10 Philippine government ships entered the waters around the shoal Huangyondao, and that has used water cannons to drive them off. Manila denied ramming and said the action followed China's recent move to designate part of the area as a national nature reserve, which the Philippines, Bajo de Manzanloc, has formally protested. The Philippine Coast Guard said 2 Chinese Coast Guard ships trained water cannons on the BRP Datugumbay Pyong for nearly 30 minutes, shattering a bridge window, damaging equipment, and short-circuiting electrical systems. Manila also reported a Chinese Navy radio broadcast announcing live fire exercises at the shoal, which it said sparked panic among Filipino fishermen. Philippine Coast Guard and fisheries vessels were in the area to deliver fuel, water, ice, and other supplies to more than 35 fishing boats. Now, the latest clash underscores a pattern of confrontations around contested outcroppings in the South China Sea, with China claims almost in full and which several nations, including the Philippines, also claim. The waters are strategically vital and home to valuable fisheries, and incidents have intensified as both sides test control and access. International reactions mounted quickly. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called China's actions yet another coercive move to advance sweeping maritime claims. The UK and Australia voiced concern, and Canada said it opposes using environmental designations to assert control over Scarborough Shoal. Let's take a look.
The Philippine Coast Guard said Tuesday 2 Chinese Coast Guard ships hit a Filipino fishing vessel with powerful water cannons for nearly 30 minutes, resulting in significant damage, including in the captain's cabin and the bridge. A glass window was shattered and injured a personnel, while the deluge of water caused a short circuit that affected electrical outlets and 5 outdoor air conditioning units, it said. A Chinese Navy warship also broadcast a radio notice announcing live fire exercises at the shoal, which caused panic among Filipino fishermen, said the Philippine Coast Guard. The Philippine Coast Guard and fisheries ships were deployed to the shoal on Tuesday to provide fuel, water, ice and other aid to more than 35 fishing boats in the area. Several friendly countries have backed the Philippines on the nature reserve. A statement from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called the Chinese action yet another coercive move to advance sweeping territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea at the expense of its neighbors. The UK and Australia also expressed concern, and the Canadian Embassy in the Philippines said it opposed attempts to use environmental protection as a way to take control over the disputed Scarborough Shoal.
Now, just before we end the news, let's have a quick look at tomorrow's weather forecast. And to end the news tonight, a quick recap of the top headlines. Suspect in Kirk killing charged with aggravated murder, prosecutors cite DNA match in texts. And President Trump heads to UK for historic second state visit. $15 billion defamation suit filed against the New York Times by President Donald Trump. And the Georgia Supreme Court keeps Fani Willis disqualified from Trump election case. Minnesota's special election draws attention after killing a lawmaker. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. Join us at the same time tomorrow for more news. I'm Joel Richards, signing off. Good night, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.